Hello and welcome to the 6 Plus show, a podcast for your wargaming and 40k needs. Hobby talk, tactics, tournament reports, lore and much more. We have it all. Please welcome your host for the evening, Tom.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and shroud runners to that 6 Plus show. I am your host, Tom, and I am very, very excited because we have here today one of the very best 40k players there is, the one and only Vik Vijay. How are you doing, Vik?
Oh, thanks, Tom. Cheers for having me on.
It's a real pleasure.
I really like you guys. I played Chris so many times.
You have.
And finally, I got to meet all of you guys at the
Yes.
International Team Tournament. So it's been a pleasure, and I'm really chuffed that you brought me on today.
Oh, no, it's a real pleasure, as I say. And so we really enjoyed playing you guys at that event. It was really, really fun. It's classic that it ended up being Chris into you again. It's because I think you live rent-free in Chris's head. So it's very, very funny. And he really enjoyed that game. And we had a real laugh recounting that whole round because it was so fun for us. Like that little moment where we're like, oh, maybe we've got something here. And then we just got rolled. It was so good. Really fun round. So what we're doing today, obviously this is State of Play. I've actually not done State of Play for a few weeks, but now my work is calming down. I'm like, yeah, let's do State of Play again. And what I like to do in this show is we talk about a given faction with a specialist and a long-time fan of the faction and get a little sense of where that faction sits in the current meta. Obviously, we're in this Arcs of Omen meta with all the spice that brings at the moment, and some of the key things you're doing, some of the things that are in your thoughts about how to navigate and use that faction in the current moment. And that faction today will be Aeldari, the wonderful Aeldari. Now, for me, Aeldari they're my sort of missed opportunity in 9th. I played them a lot in 8th, and they were just. Did you ever just have it where you're in love with other stuff at a moment in time, right? So a book comes out, Aeldari comes out, and I'm just kind of like, I did Aeldari for ages. I'm not really feeling this right now, and I didn't really make the most of that book. And it's something I look back on and go, oh, I regret that. I should have absolutely played that book a lot more than I did. But do you want to tell people a little bit about your kind of history and backstory with the Aeldari?
Yeah, so I mean, Eldar are the first army that I played, Craftworld Eldar, and it's one of those factions where I always look for the moments where they're good again for me to jump back into them.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, when you go home and you have that home cooked food, and it just hits the right place.
Yeah.
That's Eldar, and it doesn't matter how good it is. It just it feels really good. So I mean, I'm not here to sell Eldari shares or anything, but I'm so hyped to talk about Eldar because I think they're one of the most dynamic factions, both competitively and also narratively. It's a very kind of good narrative concept that they have. And once you get the combination of those things with some cool models, it's one of those factions that like people love them if they really get them.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and I think the aesthetic and the lore and the story around them is so compelling, and one of the great 40k stories. And I think what I love is that their play and their weaknesses match that story so well, right? You've got that fragility and that vulnerability that's kind of at the heart of the faction, and how you have to use it very carefully and be very sort of well judged and sensible with your resources. It's just sort of it's part and parcel of their story and their history, which I really like. I've realized in my excitement I've jumped straight into talking about Aeldari, but I haven't given you a chance to tell everyone and the listeners, what you're about and where you're from more broadly. So do you want to just briefly sort of tell people about yourself as well, and then we'll get into the sort of the meat and bones of the fact.
Sure, of course, no problem. So I've met a lot of people in competitive 40k. I've been doing it for a while now, so I think it's coming up to my 6th year in it, and I jumped straight into competitive gaming from the start. I'm seeing the same kind of people over and over again, and it's only in probably the last 2 or 3 years I've really kind of worked out my play style and my play skill and everything. And I finished second in the world last year in the ITC rankings.
You did. Amazing.
And me and my good friend David Gaylard have set up a podcast called Fireside 40k Podcast, where we just kind of talk about our journey in 40k. We do this kind of like really chilled out vibe. So thanks for letting me.
Chilled out is exactly right. No, Fireside's my favorite. I've got a bit of a commute with my job in Fireside. Whenever that comes out, I'm very, very excited to have that on in the drive. It's the smooth jazz music, and then it's just that you've both come at it with this really measured and relaxed and thoughtful sort of approach that I think sometimes absent in the sort of the wild, loud conversation around this game with all the passion that people have. I think it's really nice that you guys have this lovely sort of relaxed and empathetic way of looking at things, but also just some of the best insights and analysis I think that you can get. So it's an amazing listen. We're really big fans, and so yeah, no, it's very, very cool to be able to sort of be meeting and getting you and David involved in some of our content too. That's really, really cool.
Thank you.
Very nice. And obviously, I mean, you've historically played for Dice Down as well, right? Do you want to tell people a little bit about Dice Down?
Yeah. So Dice Down is a team I've played for the past 3.5 years. So quite a long time. It was basically through the entire development of myself as a 40k player. And it's a group of 10 players who are, at the time when I joined, they were extremely competitive, like the best players in the world kind of level. And we basically just wanted to play the game the correct way, which was the big draw I had to joining. And recently there's been a bit of a change in that though. Me and Dave have kind of split off and we've made a different team called Ignite, which is just aimed at seeing if we can compete with Art of War by bringing together some of the best players in Europe. So we've got Brian Seep from Scotland and we've got Jokel Johansson, and that's the four of us. So Jokel's the Iceland team captain. So we've got a little group and we're just trying to collect people together, especially as 40k grows and becomes more like an esport. It's kind of good to kind of get...
it's exciting, right?
Yeah, kind of build for that from now, and that's really our aim. So
yeah, fantastic. I'm really excited to see what happens with Ignite. I'd seen it pop up on David's tag, and I was very curious. I was going to sort of pick your brains and see what that was going. And I think, anything that's got you and David and Brian involved gets my vote immediately. So I'm really excited to see what you guys do with that. Fantastic. And as I say, massive respect to the Dice Down guys. As you say, they've been around for a very long time, and they're wonderful players as well. Malik is one of my favorite people in the 40k world. I very much, whenever he sort of comes out of his retirement and plays more Warhammer, it's very nice to see him as well. No, that's fantastic and really exciting. Brilliant. Okay, right. Not the conventional way around of doing it, but I've saved it. It's not the end of the world. Right, so here we go. What we're going to do now is get into thinking a little bit about Aeldari at the moment. And I guess as a sort of general ethos type question, I think it's helpful perhaps for the listener to understand, as you see it, what Aeldari's place in the game broadly across editions and across moments in time is, right? What's their role? What's the kind of character and function of Aeldari as an army versus the many other factions you can play as in the game?
Yeah. Okay, so Eldar are interesting because they do match their narrative very well. And you immediately see this kind of fragile, very fast army that has incredible psychers, some of the best psychers in the lore. Yeah. And then they also have hyper specialized units in the aspect warriors. And that essentially translates to the game. So if you have units that say are very expensive in terms of points cost, very fragile in terms of durability, but their output against specific targets is brilliant, especially when you get the psychic support synergizing with the units. So that plays out exactly on the board, and their speed allows them to hit with those units where they need to.
Yeah.
Saying that, you make a mistake, your units don't hit in the right place, or you get hit in the wrong place, then your durability doesn't allow you to carry on with the game. So there's a lot of payoff if you get it right, and a lot to lose if you get it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. You get an aspect warrior just looking back at you like, hey man, why are you getting me to do this? This isn't my thing. I can't help you here, right? You've played me wrong. I'm not in the right place. No, and I think that was it. They were like my second army I went to, right, having done a much more forgiving like intro type army. And the appeal from the outside, which I think you're kind of iterating here, is, as you say, everything is so specialized, which once you start knowing how to use tools is amazing, because you feel like I've just got this unit that just does this thing I need it to do so well, but can also be very daunting because, as you say, there's not room for error here, and if you put the pieces of the puzzle in the wrong places, it can go wrong. So there's definitely a skill cap with Eldar where they take some getting used to, and I think it's no surprise that sort of very technical and very high skilled players are the ones that tend to be able to make them sing and get the most out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, in 9th edition, the way that they sit is actually really interesting for player development because they have so many layers of rules with strands of fate, even just that battle focus rule, just how technical that is and how much of a difference it makes, along with their kind of movement out of phase with quicken, fire and fade, manipulation of battle focus. All of these things are layers which Eldar players can learn to be better at. Yeah. And I think, every level of Eldar player is going to gain something from every game they play. Even if you're very, very experienced, you're still going to go into a game, come out of it and be like, I wish I'd battle focused in, 3 inches in the other direction. Would have changed the game 2 turns later. And it's so rewarding.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And Strands of Fate was a really cool mechanic when I saw that in the 9th edition release as well, because as the sort of the reward for the person thinking a couple of steps ahead and strategizing, you look at those different pieces you've been given for the turn, you're like, oh, okay, here's the way, right? Here are my sort of my certainties or my sort of my efficiencies to make certain things happen. But again, if you don't know what you're looking at or looking for, it can just seem like you've got a bunch of sixes and you're not sure where to put them and how to make things work, right? So it's something that, again, the more complete a picture you have of the game state and of the army, the more you can really get out of it. At which point it starts to feel incredibly powerful, right?
For sure.
Yeah. No, wonderful. Okay. Well, let's talk about the current meta, right? Obviously, we've got Arcs of Omen. We've got a few sort of heavy hitters in that meta at the moment. I guess I wanted to start with the good news and what you see as the positives for Aeldari in the current Arcs of Omen moment, and then whether there's any particular challenges or anything that you think is difficult for Aeldari out in the meta at the moment as well. But let's start with the good news. That's how we like to do things, right?
Sure. So the good news, I think, going into this particular meta is that there's been a significant balance update to flyers.
Yeah.
And flyers were a significant problem for factions like Eldar Sisters, anything with fragile units. And flyers not being relevant in the meta is a huge benefit. It allows you to play a lot of these fragile units. On top of that, we also got a balance update to indirect fire, and a lot of indirect fire weapons aren't as effective as they were before. We've still got mortars in the meta, so unfortunately, the very best indirect fire is still good against Eldar, so you have to consider it if you're going through a singles tournament that mortars can be very effective against anything with a 3+ save or worse that is not infantry and can't gain cover. Anything better than that, you'll get 2+ save and cover and you're okay.
Yeah, you're all right.
So those two things have allowed Eldar to be a little bit more viable. And then on top of that, you've got a slightly different meta where, there's more Space Marines. Eldar weaponry tends to be quite good into Space Marines.
Yeah.
And just the ability to use all of you, it doesn't matter what the points cost is. If you can survive enough to get all your tech pieces working, which is what this meta allows, Eldar will be more successful. And we're already starting to see that in tournament results.
Yeah.
Eldar have a very good win rate across both Ynnari and Asuryani. And they're taking high placings in tournaments as well, which is really promising to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was exactly the same reason that my Drakari and my Harlequin started looking at me the other week. Was like, oh, there's Marines about. It's just fun to hit a Marine really hard from miles away, right? It's a nice thing to be able to do. And Aeldari, in general, I remember this with late 8th as well. It was the same thing, right? The same phenomenon where Marines have their heyday. It feels like they always come out in force a couple of times an edition. And when that's the case, the Eldar are there like, good, it's hunting season for us. We can go and play that game. And it's interesting that you talk about artillery. I mean, I completely agree with you on flyers, right? Stuff like Harpies was hard work. Sunshark bombers. Yeah, there are a few things that could just drop bombs on you, make a real problem for you. And flyers are nothing like as scary when they have to drop in. Although it is a little sad for the Eldar flyers as well. I don't know how you feel about Eldar flyers.
They were already struggling anyway.
Yeah,
so it doesn't feel like a loss, to be honest.
No, they're paying for their sins, aren't they? They're in limbo for a while yet, I think. No, that's really cool. And I think in terms of the current sort of positives in terms of matchups in the meta, what sorts of the main builds or common armies out there at the moment do you think Eldar have a good game into? And if you want to elaborate a little bit about why that is, that'd be really useful as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, so if we look at list design and consider the kind of things which are good for Eldar, the mortal wound output is very high, potentially, and it's one of the few armies that's extremely viable at the moment in this meta, which can output higher level of mortal wounds. That means people don't tend to tech for protection against it.
Yeah, that's right.
You immediately have that damage output. So that means that you can handle units which are really, really durable. So let's say the Deathwing Terminators.
Yes.
Right? So,
I've heard of those, yeah.
Leman Russ battle tanks. So these are notoriously difficult units to kill. Land Fortresses, very tough to kill. Votan ones.
Yeah.
Mortal Wounds do a good job against these units. So you immediately have that as a tool. And then on the other side of it, you have stuff like Shroud Runners, which are very, very effective with a high volume of fire.
Yeah.
And then you also have quite good anti-tank in stuff like Dcannons. So the kind of scale between these three things, you can kind of tweak depending on the meta here. And let's say you think that Guard are really good. You're maybe going to go for a little even balance of both. And then if you
Yes.
think you're definitely going to hit loads of Dark Angels players, you just reduce the scatter lasers a little bit on the Shroud Runners, and you
Yeah.
up the mortal wounds and you up the Dcannons.
Yeah.
So I think they have a good game into all of the meta, including the very top of the meta. I think overall they have an excellent game into most of the meta, and they can give the very best armies a game, like Dark Angels or Imperial Guard. I think there are tools in there for you to have a chance against the very best, and you're a powerful enough faction to really do well against everything else, pretty much.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, and that's awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing this playing itself out a bit as well, because I think, as I say, there's that feeling at the moment in the meta. Oh, Dark Angels are strong, Guard are strong, and as you say, it's about building solutions to that, and I think we're starting to see it. It felt like at Southampton, Dark Angels didn't have everything their own way for sure. They fell down in more matchups than they were expecting, I think, and that's reassuring to know that the Guard also have some counters. I remember when we looked at your list for the teams event.
Mm-hmm.
We had one read down it, and we're like, "Oh, hold on now. We don't want to get the Guard into that. That looks like,
I thought you were going to give it to me as well.
No.
That was an option.
We'd had a look at it, and we were just like, okay. No, there's some problems in here. This isn't one to take lightly. And obviously, we decided to YOLO the Guard mirror, which was obviously a really fun story in the end, anyway. So no, that's really good and really interesting to hear. I mean, do you see weaknesses? Are there any particular cons for them at the moment, or are you feeling quite confident? What kinds of matchups might be an issue?
I think the two hardest matchups are definitely Astra Militarum and Dark Angels, which is, I think, going to be universal for every army in the game.
Yeah.
But the fact that they have mortars immediately stops you from using things like Howling Banshees on foot. Yeah. And I think in a team's environment, you can do that. You can run the Howling Banshees on foot, and craft walls become so much better because of it. But if you can't, you've got to keep them inside of transport. You've just increased the cost of the unit by double. So I think that one is tough because the mortars are a massive challenge on top of actually probably being behind on primary and secondary. So you've got to be killing your opponent to actually win the game. Yeah. And it's exactly the same issue with Dark Angels. You've got to be killing your opponent to win the game, but they're incredibly durable across the middle of the board. So you fall behind on primary, and that's probably the biggest weakness Craft Worlds have had for a long time. Against really tough armies that are better than them, put too much pressure on them. It can take them too long to catch up and dig out space to then score primary. And by dig out space, I mean trying to hold two objectives. Yeah. That's a massive challenge, because if you can hold one objective in your backfield, that happens all the time, but the second objective requires you to remove threat, which can attack that objective. And Eldar can't handle threat very well because they're so fragile. So Dark Angels and Guard being able to apply so much threat with very efficient units, they have too much in their army pretty much, can make it very difficult to maintain your 8s on primary. And by the time you can, it might be too late to catch up.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's where, I know this is something that some people get very annoyed with. It's a precarious game, right? I think Aeldari is a precarious game. You have to have a real balance and control in the mission, and sometimes you have to cede ground in order to spring that proper killing moment and get the enemy put away in a meaningful way. Because as you say, you don't have casual assets where you can be like, that's fine, that can go, I can dispose that, that's fine. Certainly not for the primary, right? Unless you're actually using all of those forces to put the opponent away substantially, it's not worth sticking your head out. And that does mean that, as you say, you're going to find yourself in that catch-up situation, which is daunting, definitely daunting. And it's interesting, I mean, you talk about the artillery, it sounds like delivery solutions are a big part of this, right? In terms of dealing with things like Guard and other kinds of artillery, you need to have ways of getting your forces and your assets to bear on them without falling victim to those kinds of threats. So, I mean, what kinds of solutions do you think there are to doing that?
So there's two ways you can deal with artillery. One is killing them, and one is surviving them. So Eldar are unique in the sense that they have actually a good tool for killing mortars. Yes. In the form of the Night Spinner.
They do have the Night Spinner.
The Night Spinner is not an efficient platform generally, but in a meta where mortars can cause so many problems, a Night Spinner pretty much on average, if it has ignore cover, can kill a unit of mortars. You might have to use a little bit of dice manipulation, maybe CP reroll the number of shots, but you can pretty consistently do that every turn. So by turn 3, you'll have removed the mortars. If you run 2 of them, it is a possibility. You can run 2 of them. You really, really tilt that Guard matchup towards you, because then you're starting to consistently kill Guardsmen and Kazakin. They almost can't start the Kazakin on the board. Or just out in the open. Eldar have a tool to kill. They also have a tool via the Shroud Runners who can, say if you're in Swift Strikes, which allows you to advance and shoot as if you were remain stationary, they could move 22 inches after pre-game moving 16 inches. So that's 38 inches, and then maybe even shoot into the back where the mortars are positioned.
Wow.
So Eldar have two very good options for dealing with mortars. If, let's say, you go second, and that's a very real possibility, I think you still have to build to consider that they're going to get at least one good turn of mortar shooting, probably two good turns if they go first. And in that case, you just can't keep fragile units out on the board to just get shot for free. You can't lose a 110-point Banshee unit to two mortar squads. No, it's not worth it.
No, absolutely not. No, that's really interesting. And Shroud Runners, I mean, we'll talk about them both. We'll talk about key units in a moment because I think Shroud Runners are massive, and there's a whole bunch of reasons that they go really well into this current meta. But the points drop on those was very nice, right? It was super nice. Yeah, exactly. Like a nice treat in the rebalance. You've alluded to it already, but I want to take it to a sort of traits and builds type conversation now. I mean, if we start with traits, one of the internal conversations we were having in 6 when we were thinking about the meta was what direction to go with traits for Craftworlds, right? Chris is building some Craftworlds. Chris loves his damage. Chris was very much talking up Hail of Doom, and I, at the time, was saying, I just think Masterful Shots is too good to be giving up on, especially when that one you can still combo with other things. And so, I mean, I've had the luxury of listening to you talk about Eldar before. Do you want to just explain to people sort of Masterful Shots and the significance of it, but then maybe talk about some of your other favorite traits and their uses as well?
Let me do something which I haven't done on any other podcasts. Let me go into like splitting this up into 4 different categories.
Oh, this is exciting. Okay.
All right, here we go. Yeah, I'm holding nothing back for you.
I appreciate it.
So, in terms of 4 different categories, I'm going to go with what I would say is the easiest one to play. Yeah. Right. And I think that's any of the Alpha Strike melee builds that you see. So anything like Ynnari or Vengeful, with the Exploding Sixes Craftful trait, those kinds of armies which then tailor into an Alpha Strike. So let's say you're playing 2 units of Striking Scorpions, some Shroud Runners, the Incons getting thrown in. Those kinds of armies that can do huge amounts of damage on the first turn will be good in a tournament because lots of people can't handle Alpha Strikes too well. So you'll get consistent results with that. So if you want something that you're always going to do well with, go for that one. The second one, Hail of Doom. So Hail of Doom is any 6s to hit, automatically wound, and count as a shuriken kind of +2 AP. And it works on all shuriken weapon in your army. It's very powerful because Dire Avengers are one of the most points effective units that we have in the Codex, and this really ramps them up. So you can very easily and straightforward build an army that does a huge amount of direct damage output using Hail of Doom. And the list kind of builds itself as well. It's really easy list building. I think that is the second easiest army to play, but also probably one of the best sub-factions to use.
Oh, yeah, super strong.
You'll get really consistent results. It's excellent in teams and singles, and it's good into pretty much the entirety of the meta. The third one, and the rewards start getting higher as your player skill improves with this.
The payoff, yeah.
The third one is Ulthway.
Okay.
So Ulthway has a massive suite of rules that make it a very consistent high-scoring army. The main things being it gets +1 to cast, it gets to reroll a wound, and it also gets a relic, which is extremely important, where anytime you cast on a 9+, your spell is undeniable.
The Ghost Helm.
Yeah. The Ghost Helm of Ali Shazir.
So good.
Very, very powerful because it immediately opens up a Psychic Secondary, which is consistent there, regardless of if the opponent has a deny. It's not going to matter against Astra Militarum, but even against Dark Angels, it's very, very useful to have. So that's the third one. I think that's very consistent. You'll always score high. If you play it perfectly, you'll get really good results with that. And then you go on to the Masterful Shots kinds of builds. So Masterful Shots is ignore cover, and that's usually combined with Swift Strikes. So Swift Strikes is the advance and shoot. So the combination of those two opens up some units like Shroud Runners, even Vipers, Warwalkers, anything with heavy weapons like that are excellent. Swooping Hawks are a little bit too expensive now, but Warp Spiders are very well priced to make use of this.
Mm.
Being able to advance automatically 6 inches, move 12 plus 6 are 18, and then shoot their 12-inch guns, and then use their web of deceit
and
exile
then
power.
battle focus,
So
super cool.
you can get a really good hammer unit out of that. You could also combine it with one of many other different secondary traits. I personally like the reroll a wound, kind of like a mini Ultway, ignore cover Ultway, I call it,
Nice.
because it opens up things like Dcannons, and even the Night Spinner becomes more consistent with it, and I really respect that kind of indirect fire output. You can go. Once you go for that, you need to be playing the game really well to make the most of Swift Strikes and Masterful Shots, because you're not necessarily scoring high, and your output is not high unless you're putting everything into the right place. But the payoff is that when you get everything correct, it's very, very consistent, and it has a game into the entirety of the meta. Just having Ignore Cover there immediately makes the Dark Angels game a little bit easier if you tech for
completely.
it. That's my kind of ranking system and differences between them. I think they're all pretty even, and you can work with any of them, but depending on your skill level and what kind of playstyle you want to play, you're going to get different results depending on what you go for.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Night Spinner and Masterful Shots, that was always the appeal for me, because like you realize that even with the artillery changes, that still makes it a very reliable sort of unit for getting that damage on and forcing saves even on armored targets, right? Because you strip those layers of defenses away, and that's where the flexibility comes in. And as I say, so Swift Strikes is a really interesting one, because as you say, the skill level with that is high, because being able to move really quick and shoot, great, but you still have to be able to exploit the positioning, make the most of your resources there. And as you say, you are definitely sacrificing a little bit in terms of overall output, but it means that you're going to be able to get a wider range of types of damage into different places, I think, right? I think that's always the thing I've felt with Hail, which is exactly where you're going with Hail, right? It's shuriken everywhere, and that comes with some limitations in terms of its reach, in terms of the units that actually can carry it, and how you can apply it. So yeah, that's really, really interesting to see. And in terms of builds themselves, these are a lot of the Eldar builds end up being combined arms builds, right? Do you still feel that's the way to go? Like a little bit of psychic, a little bit of melee, a little bit of shooting?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that's one side of it. That's the output side of it. And I think for the output side, you need a little bit of a mix. And I think you still heavily lean into shooting. I think that's more effective for Eldar generally. But you have sprinkles of combat. And there's some elements of combat which are extremely efficient in Eldar compared to everything else. The first Striking Scorpion unit you take, with Crushing Blows and Biting Blade, so they auto wound with 7 attacks, exploding 6s, 2 damage each on those on the Exarch. That particular unit is very, very effective.
Yeah.
And then the first Howling Banshee unit you take, where it has 2 damage on the 10 attacks from the Exarch, Mirror Swords and Piercing Strikes, really, really effective as well. So if you're going to sprinkle something in, you see a lot of people sprinkling one of each of those units. And then you get interesting things where you start to introduce characters, like Baharoth is an excellent melee piece, and so are some of the Harlequin characters. So it's very common to see Harlequins kind of souped in, and then you get kind of the Troop Master who does a bit of damage. Even the troops are more efficient than the Eldar melee choices. And then you get the Ynnari side, where you get the Yunkan giving you a little bit of melee.
Ynnari is fun to say. That's the only game I've ever had against Dave, was my Ynnari getting absolutely rolled by his Leviathan Tyranids. That was one of those matches where like it was exactly. It was like, oh, this isn't good. This isn't something I have the right answers to. It was a really fun game. But the Incan, another piece that rewards the sort of the play and the precision use of timing so much. No, that's really interesting. I mean, let's start unpacking some of the key units. I think the one I'm really interested in hearing more about to start off with is Shroud Runners, right? Because as you say, they're having a breakout moment. They've suddenly started appearing in lists all over the place, and there are actually several layers to what make them useful, right? They're one of those units that actually play very different roles in different kinds of matchups. I wondered if you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so they're a very versatile unit because their output's good, their speed's good, their durability is actually super relevant because they get +2 to their cover save in cover. So and they can benefit from light cover, which is unique for bikes. So they have a 2+ save in cover, which is exactly what you want against mortars. So they're
what you want.
Playable against guard, which is key. That ticks a box.
Crucial.
They can go in the list. But then on top of that, they're only 90 points for 3 is incredibly cheap. They allow you to act. So this is the next bit. So you've got the output out the way. Now you've got to get the secondaries. And I'm also going to talk about control, because control is a big part of playing Eldar. And the Shroudrunners achieve both of those things. So they give you secondaries by being very good at doing behind enemy lines.
Yes.
They're a very cheap first turn behind enemy lines. You just throw one unit away.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, they also give you control. And by control, I mean, with Eldar, the kind of the biggest win condition you can get. Again, I've never talked about this on a podcast. Just for you.
Oh, thank you.
The biggest win condition for Eldar is when you control a portion of the enemy's army and you make it so that they can't interact with one side of your army. And because Eldar are so fast, you can basically deny an entire flank. So you have half of your units hidden on one side, and then the other half actually going out and doing things, but he can only interact with a small portion of his army into that part, and that's the portion that you're trying to kill and whittle down. So the Shroudrunners are good because they're on quite large bases, so they can move block enemy units.
Yes.
They also have an incredible stratagem in the Wire Weave Grenade stratagem, which can be used at the start of the opponent's movement phase or charge phase, but you can only do one. And it's minus D3 inches movement to an enemy unit, and they take D3 mortal wounds, or minus D3 to their charge if it's used in the charge phase. But let's say we use it for movement. You can really cut down the ability for a unit to reposition with that Shroudrunner unit, especially if it doesn't fly. It's really tricky. But even if it does fly, you can block out the final position of the unit as well. So always look out for kind of control moments with your Shroudrunners, because those are the game-winning moments I've found.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's shaping and herding the enemy, isn't it? It's a very Eldar thing to be doing. They love this nonsense. They love sending out all these sort of uncivilized armies in directions they don't want to go in. And so that's it. Yeah, and I think they're amazing, as you say. It's a cheap unit that shoots well, positions well, can harass, can force the opponent into different places, and the extra cover is actually really, really relevant. And that's I hadn't really appreciated that before. But as you say, when there is artillery out there, being able to be on a 2-up before even the modifiers and other things start getting involved, super, super valuable.
Definitely. Yeah.
Another unit that you mentioned earlier on that I think has been in the meta for quite a while now, but I'm curious to see how you feel it currently sits, is the Dcannon, right? The Dcannon kind of emerged as a solution, I guess, during an era which we can thank you for with the with the CSM glory days, right? Where there were a lot of big, powerful sort of possessed and terminators and other things around. That's the first time I remember seeing them. But what do you feel the current place and use of Dcannons in an Eldar army is?
So it's an interesting one because I think a lot of people are not running Dcannons, like across Europe and America. It's just not a very commonly taken unit for some reason. I love Dcannons. I think they're immense. They're such a good unit, and they're such a tricksy little piece because you can get them down to single units or big units of 3, and they have very different roles. The single units can block out space, allow you to kind of put your Strands of Fate dice into an area. So even if there's only one, if you get 2 shots on it, you could easily kill a tank with that. If you just pop a couple of automatic 6s into that. But then they also character block because they are vehicles.
Nice.
So the little single units are awesome, especially if you're Altway or a reroll to wound subfaction, because the reroll to wound is super relevant with that. The next thing is the big unit of 3. Now, the big unit of 3 is a massive tech piece, and it has been for a while now. It goes from everything to just pumping out loads of damage. It has a lot of stratagems which support it. Either reroll 1s to hit because it's a Guardian unit, or if it's within 12, if an enemy unit is within 12 inches of a Ranger unit, you can get full rerolls to hit. Very, very powerful. Also, it's very effective with Phantasm. You can use it to block out space with Phantasm really easily because it's indirect fire. It just covers an entire kind of 18-inch bubble where people can't deep strike. Otherwise, they get Dcannoned to the face. In this meta as well, things like Land Speeders, Sentinels, Lehman Russes, these are all perfect targets for Dcannons. And even Harlequin Starweavers. Chris can attest to that. Like, single Dcannons are surprisingly effective with Strands of Fate dice into Harlequin boats and things. So we're seeing a lot of units which Dcannons are effective into. Now, Dark Angels Terminators are actually a pretty good target for Dcannons. Nothing is a great target for Dark Angels Terminators, but Dcannons can really spike, especially because they have Blast. It almost forces the opponent to split them into units of 5, which are much more manageable for Eldar than the big units of 10.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think, as you say, I think we've got a meta where there are so many little vehicles and things popping around, and I guess the players using those, especially into elves, they want to use that as bait, right? They want to make you go places you don't want to go, show your face in places you don't want to be, and the Dcannon goes, nah, you're just gone. I'm going to blow you up, and I'm still hidden away, and that's the thing. And so they're a very flexible, powerful unit, and as I say, that again is where Strands of Fate suddenly goes up a level, because it's a hit and a wound. How much can that do? Well, you put that on a gun like a Dcannon, and that is a big deal, right? To have those efficiencies in slapping on serious damage. Yeah. And as you say, big bricks of tough stuff. The Dcannon, even as you say, there's never anything that has like the perfect efficiency into that transhuman, but it gets a lot done. And again, it's nice, and another weapon that can help put your opponent on the clock, which is something Eldar like to do, right? I think Eldar likes a situation where they feel they're under pressure to go places and do things at certain times rather than the other way around. Do you want to elaborate on any other sort of key units, and then we'll think about characters after that?
Key units, probably the Dire Avengers are a key unit.
Yeah.
I think they do pop up in multiple lists, and one thing I'm not seeing is people taking them in the ignore cover lists, where I think they're actually very, very relevant. If anything, I would say that Dire Avengers with ignore cover are more relevant in this meta than Hail of Doom Dire Avengers, simply because Dark Angels Terminators are probably a key issue for Eldar, and the Dire Avengers give you a solution if they can ignore cover. Without ignore cover, the Dark Angels Terminators are still on a 2-up save against your non-rending shots. Yeah. But as soon as you get ignore cover on, they're on a 3-up save. And then if you throw Jinx onto it, you have the opportunity to do a lot of damage with just 10 Dire Avengers. So yeah, I'd say the Dire Avengers are the only truly efficient unit in the Eldar Codex, in my opinion.
Wow. No, I know exactly what you mean. They're one of those units you look at and think about its output, and you're like, yeah, this is I can see value here. This feels cheap and cheerful and up to do stuff, which is actually for Eldar has been a real issue in the edition, because everything is so expensive. As soon as you start thinking about wounds per cost, you just it's not even worth going there. It's not a good time. And obviously, I guess. Oh, sorry. After you. Yeah.
Sorry, no, it's okay. I just wanted to make this point because it's quite key for Dire Avengers, is that Strategic Reserves is free now, and Dire Avengers play beautifully out of Strategic Reserves, especially because they can RBD and still shoot, which is extremely powerful for Hail of Doom. It makes that secondary very consistent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, action and shoot, an amazing thing to have built in, and I think squads them. I like smaller squads personally, but I've definitely seen lists. It's the little 6-man that gets it done with the double catapults on the X-Arc. There's just so many shots for 6 guys. It's great. Okay, fantastic. Any other units, or should we talk characters?
Let's go characters.
Let's go characters, because this has actually been. I think I remember when I first started playing Eldar, and there were like 2 that you took, and then the Warlocks. But it has felt like with this book, there is genuine choice and diversity in terms of the directions people go in with the HQs, to the point that, is in the sort of the weird moments when I'm thinking, what about an all HQ or like 6 HQs list? It doesn't even sound like the worst thing in the world, right? Because there's just so many different characters and so many ways you can build. And I guess we could probably group these into sort of the sort of psychic and force multiplier dimensions, and then the aspect warriors. And I'm curious what your thoughts on both those kind of camps are, and what sorts of things you personally like.
So from the psychic side, I try and keep it as minimum as possible.
Okay.
To be honest, there's one package which I always want in my list, which is a Warlock Skyrunner to go and do Warp Ritual, and something to quicken him back.
Yeah, he's got to get home again. Yeah,
I love that little combination. It's very points efficient. If you just do it with 2 Warlocks on foot for Quicken and Restrain and 1 Warlock Skyrunner, that's 115 points for that package, and it's extremely versatile. A little bit awkward against Guard with the little 2-man on foot. You might have to spend another 15 points and maybe put him on a jet bike as a character. But yeah, that combo every time. And then a Farseer, at least 1 Farseer.
Yeah.
In America, we're seeing a lot of people running 2 Farseers. I personally don't think you necessarily need it now, but because they're really expensive.
It's a lot of points, right? Yeah.
So I love this Farseer. I run 1 Farseer. Either they'll have Guide and Doom, or if I'm playing a list which doesn't require Guide and Doom, which I think a number of lists don't at the moment. You can just take like Executioner, a little bit more mortal wounds. And then I love giving this guy in every single list list. It doesn't matter what the list is. I like giving him the Kernos bow and the Mark of the Incomparable Hunter, which is just a mortal wound pistol, basically.
Yeah, it's a lovely combo, right? Because you can just, again, with comboing with the fate dice and stuff, you can just slap mortal wounds. And I think sometimes just being able to push that a little bit more crunch damage through is so good to have. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And how about the Aspect Warriors?
So this is the Phoenix Lords, right? So
Phoenix Lords.
The Phoenix Lords are in a glorious moment where they are all viable except for Fugan. So if we ignore Fugan, every single
he's waiting for the end times. His time will come.
His time will come. Every single Phoenix Lord is viable, and I don't know how they manage this. They're all kind of the correct amount of points. I mean, they're not like, some of them maybe could be 10 points cheaper, but they're all in the correct price bracket for what they do on the board, so they feel balanced as well. But they're so cool. And the thing is, even if you take someone like Jane Czar, so there's lots of weirdness with the Phoenix Lords. Jane Czar doesn't have +1 to wound like the Banshee, so she hits really badly, but she has so much utility with an always fight last. She's really fast. She's obsec, incredible control piece, and she probably makes my top 3 Phoenix Lords.
Nice.
And then you have Morgan Ra, another weird rule. He has a massive shuriken cannon that doesn't have the shuriken rule. So
I know, what the hell.
But his profile of strength 7 -2 damage is perfect into things like land speed. Is very relevant in this meta, and he can punch and shoot, which is why Baharoth is the best Phoenix Lord.
Yeah, because he's flexible. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. We've got Irilith on the Forge World side, who's a little bit cheaper than all the other ones, and is 12-inch moving, which is extremely relevant, and has a good gun, a few little combat attacks, quite cheap, easy to fit into lists. And then you have pure output in Phoenix Lords like Karandras, who can deep infiltrate and does loads of damage. Probably the most output of any single unit in the Eldar Codex for melee. And so you've got a lot of, you've got a Surman. A Surman's the one which I rank a little bit lower, but he's still viable. So awesome. Every single Phoenix Lord is viable. You could run 3.
That's the thing. Every now and again, you're like, what if just all of them? And you're like, it's not terrible. It's actually not terrible, because it's that combination. It's the wound phase cap coupled with, I'm an obsec character, I can get Lookout Sir, I'm obsec, I'm phase capped, I can get back up when I die. There are just so many ways in which they give you mission play, and they're a puzzle, and their output is good as well. And obviously Baharoth has been the star. He's had a great time, because being able to just drop a Phoenix Lord in behind is a remarkable power to have. But it's an exciting time where as you say, it feels like most of them have some play. And again, when you're trying to mission hard and also catch out the opponent, and often play into difficult situations as far as damage goes as well, having ways to stall that or slow that up is absolutely massive. So no, that's really exciting, and I think it takes me towards my next question, actually, which is going to be towards the secondaries, because this is a point of curiosity. I think that I don't know, it feels like a bit of an exaggeration, but it almost felt like when they wrote Nephilim, they were rewriting the secondary game to try and control Eldar a little bit, because they took away some of the things Eldar loved so much, right? They took away To the Last, they took away Stranglehold, and for a little while, it felt like the whole Eldar community needed to reinvent and work out a new way to go about things, because we had this wonderful tradey, standoffy game at our fingertips, but then the secondary games felt like they'd been almost quite deliberately rearranged to make sure some of those sort of standoffish ways had to go away. But it feels like the picture's a little better now in Arcs of Omen, and there are more ways to go with it. And I guess, do you want to talk through some of your favorite secondaries and why you think certain ones might hold weight?
So I think the Eldar faction secondaries are how all of the secondaries should have been written, because they're extremely flavorful and they're hard to do. They're like they're okay. You could maybe take them, but have you built your list for it? Are you willing to commit to achieving that goal? Like Wrath of Cain is so cool. Like having to kind of kill stuff in combat, shoot stuff with your Aspect Warriors is just so flavorful, and it really rewards you for playing that and building into that.
Completely.
And then you've got Scout the Enemy, which is really not that good, but but it can work, and if you have enough ranger units, you can easily get a 12 on that if you've built for it. And how flavorful is it?
It's just great.
And then Scry Futures is very valid on 6 objective missions, where you get 3 points for doing a psychic action on each objective, and sometimes it can keep you out of deny range in the early game. until you dig out your space.
Yeah.
But really, I think Eldar are characterized at the moment in terms of their secondary play by the actual normal secondaries.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is because behind enemy lines has become so much better, only requiring 1 unit in the opponent's deployment zone to get
an
3
enormous
points.
change. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely enormous.
So I think that's one which all Eldar lists should try and build into, because it's pretty much a guaranteed 15 if you build your list correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's worth taking for it. Just get that out the way. You've got 15 on that. And then the other two are really variable, because Eldar is a good killing army, has good output. And if your opponent does give up one of the purge the enemy ones, bring it down, or if they give up even no prisoners, something like that, I think that's a very valid pick as a second choice. But you could also take one of the kind of shadow operations. You could do raise the banners, but I love retrieve battlefield data for Eldar as well. And then you've also got the option of taking warp ritual. So now you could do just 3 completely passive secondaries. You could do like a killing secondary plus 2 of the passive ones. You have really good options. And I found this all the way through kind of the international team tournament, that I was outscoring people on their secondaries. Even Necrons, I was outscoring them by the end of the game. So in tight games as well. So I think Eldar play the normal book secondaries very, very well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think as you say, it's fun to build into things like Wrath of Cain, scout the enemy. If maybe a Shroud Runners could do it in the same way that Rangers do with end of turn finishing. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that makes it a little bit better. I always thought the hidden path was quite fun, but in a way, I'm not sure you want the pressure that invites in your life. So, sometimes, but yeah, as you say, it feels like the killer thing was. We behind the scenes we very much call behind enemy lines new stranglehold, right? It's stranglehold with extra steps. It's you got to be a bit quicker, you got to get a bit further, but again, if you're building a good game plan around it without losing catastrophic assets, you can score that, right? You can make that a 15, and that helps us keep up with and keep pace with other armies that have these 15 secondaries all over the place, and so that's massively appealing. I think one of the things going forward for Eldar is going to be sort of looking ahead to, new things that might be on the horizon and potential changes in terms of the addition. So whilst I've got you here, I guess I'm curious what your wish list might be. Is there anything in the way Eldar play or the Eldar are currently set up that you'd like to see different or improved or changed in sort of grass is greener situations, maybe a few months down the line?
So I think the internal balance of Eldar is generally better than most codexes. Like
totally.
you can find some viability with anything. If you want to run your fire dragons, they're not that bad, to be honest. You can go for some fire dragons. Is Swift Strikes. If you want to run your Dark Reapers, I'm putting it out there. If you want to run your Dark Reapers and Swift Strikes, they're not bad in Swift Strikes.
Are they not bad? Wow.
Swift
Okay.
Strikes ignore cover. There's an option. They did get a points decrease as well.
Okay.
So I'm quite happy with the balance within the Eldar Codex. The external balance, is also acceptable. I think they've kind of positioned them correctly as an expensive army. What I'd be worried about, so my wish list is not really what I want. My wish list is what I don't want.
That's very Eldar of you. I like it.
What I don't want, and I think Eldar are very susceptible to this, any moment where things like indirect fire and flyers become too good, you can really invalidate the faction completely from the competitive meta. There was a time when all you saw were AdMech flyers and a million orc buggies shooting indirect fire. What are you going to do as an Eldar player? Like that's not fun at all. Like you can't even play the game. I always worry about things like that, which are heavily alpha strike, can target anything on the board kind of output, and I just hope they don't make anything like that too strong. You can see how easily that happens just with how good mortars are. It just like it only takes 1 unit,
literally
for
1 unit,
the entire meta to change around it because it's indirect fire.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And I think one of my sort of hopes for the new edition is that I'd like to see them get to work with terrain and make that interesting and add some new things, bring a few different terrain types into the picture without it being a serious issue. And I think if they can do that right, that gives Eldar play, because Eldar always live and die on the relationship of terrain to the other kinds of damage and reach out there. But as you say, those are the metas you don't want, the ones where there's just stuff raining down on your little elf head. So fingers crossed we can avoid that. Right, fantastic. I mean, I think we've hit all the notes I was hoping to hit. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for going a little deeper into some of the secret sauce there. That I really appreciate that. When can we next hear from you? When will your sort of wider content world be next available? What sorts of things from the Fireside are in the pipeline?
So Fireside, we just did an episode where Dave went through his Southampton Super Major win.
Exciting. Yeah, fantastic. Great.
So if you're interested in Astra Militarum and you want to know more about his list design philosophy, that's a really good episode. It's just
fantastic.
I ask him the questions, but it's all Dave, that one. If you want a little bit more of me and the Eldar side of things, I am going to Manchester GT, and I'll do an episode after the lists are released, where I'll kind of go through a little bit of that. I'm still not 100% sure if I run Eldar, but I probably do. I might end up borrowing someone else's army. It just depends. But yeah, if I do run Eldar, I'll be going into quite a deep dive on that.
Yeah, amazing, fantastic. And I guess either way, we'll hear about the thought process there.
Exactly.
And it's very cool. I'm going to be at Manchester as well, so I look forward to seeing you there. That'll be really fun. Vik, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll be back again soon. Stay safe out there, elves. It's a good time. Hide, do all the right things, and you can bring it home. All right, bye everybody. See you next time.